All right, so we're back here on a special Couch Coach Live. We're starting a 5-part series, a college football Power 5 recap. And of course, I had to bring my guy Zach from the Blue Bloods podcast back. What's going on, Zach?
Not much, man. Just happy to be back. We covered all these conferences. They all got canceled. Now we had a season, so we can finally recap them.
I know, and it's funny because and I always find it funny, like when we did the Pac-12 preview last year. Oh, it is last year.
Yeah,
I mean, no, it really was, and calendar-wise as well. We did that. We did that on a Saturday. And then what? 2 or 3 days later, that's when they canceled the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, because we didn't do a Big Ten one because it was canceled until it wasn't announced after we did. After the pretty much in the middle of most people's seasons, that's when these two conferences came back to play. So yeah, man. So definitely, like you said, that was one of the biggest question marks. Even when we did the Pac-12 preview, was the uncertainty. Because I think at that time we were even thinking. Because remember, they was having that meeting that Sunday, all Power 5 conferences was going to have a meeting, and there was kind of like, people were, having rumors of cancellations. Because I think at that time, the MAC was canceled. I think when we were actually on air. Oh no, it was a few hours before we went live, and you look at that and think, right. This has been a very rocky year, and even to everything, even the whole championship, like even Ohio State and Alabama, that was people in certain camps saying, "Well, I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to, as far as their COVID protocols." And people at that time, we were thinking we're going to miss the game, and then Papa Bear Saban's daughter popping off in the mouth on Twitter, and so
I mean, she wasn't wrong. She just shouldn't have said it publicly. But I mean, after watching the game, I feel like maybe we have a different take on that. But I mean, I feel like not enough people. Well, because I feel like when you get a lot of these national pundits on TV, they always want to be politically correct. They want to be on the right side of history. I don't think they're talking enough about how much credit the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC should really be getting right now. Because if they wouldn't have stuck by their guns, listened to the doctors within those conferences, we wouldn't be having recaps right now. And they were willing to put their public persona on the line when everybody in this country, on both sides of the aisle, on every political person, every sports analyst was saying that. We had Max Kellerman on First Take saying that Southern people are stupid because we wanted to play college football, and look what happened now. And the SEC's got a national championship because of it. I don't think there's enough credit given to those three conferences for really sticking together. And you look at what they did, but we had Pac-12 teams, that played 3 games because of their COVID protocols. We had Big Ten teams play 6 games out of their season, aka Ohio State, until they, got to the championship. I mean, there was not an SEC or ACC team that played less than 10 games this year. And I don't think enough people are talking about that. I think those conferences handled it so well, and I think they need to get more credit in terms of getting this season, through the year.
Yeah, and that was a good thing about those. And it was funny because when we talked about the Pac-12, and then because Pac-12 was in November, and we were kept. And it's funny because I looked at them, and then Big Ten came back with October the 17th. Or it was the 24th. 24th.
Yeah, yes, 24th.
And I thought to myself, like, they don't have any room for error.
Right.
The other teams, because we look at the ACC, the Big 12, they have room to kind of have situations where, and that was another thing too that helped, the timing of it, where they were able to kind of, in essence, adjust on the fly. Like, they have games that was canceled. Well, we have so many open dates in between that we can kind of, get everything together. And then you actually add that extra 2 weeks, between, because it used to be December 5th was supposed to be the conference championship games. And then you kind of go to December 19th. So that kind of helped as well. So, yeah, man, it was definitely, just how everything kind of ended, and just how everything just actually worked out. It in a weird, bizarre way, it all worked out.
We got it.
Yeah.
I can't believe it happened, with the national championship issue. I remember we were doing an episode live when all those reports came out. And I was like, man, if they have to push back the national championship, I think Nick Saban's going to end up going to jail for committing murder on somebody. He's going to be upset if his team can't play. And, the Pac-12 got rid of their commissioner. They fired him, which was needed because he handled this terribly. And I'm looking for the Big Ten. When are you going to make a move here? Because that upper management, you had parents storming your headquarters to try to play. You said it wasn't possible. You said you weren't changing your decision. And then you had a team go to the national championship and you were breaking your own rules that you said you want changed to get your team to the national championship. And so I'm looking at Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten, wondering, are you going to take any accountability, or are you just going to say, hey, we got lucky here? Like, what's going on? So I think the Pac-12 and Big Ten are going to make some big changes in terms of like upper management because of some of their decisions.
Yeah. And it's funny that we start the recaps with Pac-12, like you said.
Yeah.
This was the conference that started in November and essentially pretty much quiet as kept, had no shot at a college football playoff or anything. So my question, first thing, before we do the recap. So who was the MVP of the Pac-12?
I got one on offense and one on defense, just because it's not fair to really compare across sides of the ball. It's so hard to be a DB and win the MVP, but they come from the same school, and it's not the school anybody probably expected. You got to start. The player of the year in the Pac-12 is Jarrett Broussard, running back out of Colorado, first ever year playing running back for the Buffs. This kid absolutely dominated. He was the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year. He was number 1 in rush attempts, rushing yards, and yards from scrimmage. Was top 5 in rushing touchdowns. He's the first player since Adrian Peterson to rush for 100 yards in his first 4 games in college football. He had a 300-yard rushing game this season with 155 in one quarter, which set the school record for that. He was the first Colorado player to win this MVP award, and he's only 5'9". And this was his first ever year playing running back. 5'9", 185. He was tough to bring down. He showed versatility. He was explosive. He was fast, physical. I'm looking for Broussard to actually probably lead the league in rushing next year in terms of the country. I mean, this kid was a baller from start to start. And people are like, Colorado, people forget they were undefeated till the last week of the Pac-12 season. This was a team that had a chance to go play for the Pac-12 championship if the game against USC wasn't canceled. So this was a very, very underrated team, and Jarrett Broussard is the big reason why on offense. And in terms of defense, you look at Carson Wells, their senior linebacker on that team. He would be my pick to be MVP, but he was not a Pac-12 All-American, man. And I don't understand why. I think he was the biggest snub here. He led the Pac-12 in tackles for loss. In 6 games, man, he had 16 tackles for loss. That was second in the entire country, even compared to SEC schools that played 15 games. He was second in the country. He was second in sacks with 6.5 sacks. He had 4 pass breakups as a middle linebacker, and this was all in only 6 games. 37 tackles on top of that. He was averaging 3 tackles for loss a game. And he should be a player to watch if he decides to, use that extra year of eligibility the NCAA gave. But Broussard and Wells are a huge reason why Colorado shocked a lot of people this year.
Yeah. And it's funny because I know we talked about in the preseason, we looked at Oregon as kind of essentially the class of this division or of this conference. And and like you said, Colorado
out of nowhere. I mean, they were sitting at 3-0. It was like week 3 of their season, and we covered one of their games on the podcast. And Brandon was like, "Did you just say 3-0?" I was like, "They are 3-0," and he was like, "All right, that makes sense, I guess."
I know, right? And that's safe. That's the beauty of college football, where these guys just come out of nowhere. So, and that's perfect segue. So, who was the biggest surprise in this conference?
I'm gonna stick teams here because there were just so many players you could cover, and you got to start with Colorado at 1, just the team in general. This is their first winning season since 2016. They started the season 4-0. It was their first ever 3-0 conference start in Pac-12 school history. Their head coach, Carl Durrell, was the Pac-12 Coach of the Year. This is the first coach to win it in their first season as a head coach since Chip Kelly in 2009 when he was at Oregon. He's actually won this award twice. He was the interim coach back in 2005 at UCLA, and he still won this award, and he tied with Pete Carroll. That shows you how good this guy is at coaching. And you look at the players, Jarrett Broussard and Nate Landman were both first-team All-Pac-12. They had 4 second-team Pac-12 selections, along with 6 honorable mentions, which was some of the most in the Pac-12. They had the Player of the Year in Jarrett Broussard. This team was coming off back-to-back 5-7 seasons. This was their third head coach in 3 years, man. And they came out here and almost got a chance to play for the Pac-12 championship. They only had 2 preseason All-Americans, and they were a unanimous pick by Athlon Sports to finish last in the Pac-12. And they finished, they lost to Texas in the bowl game, but they finished the regular season with 1 loss. They played unified. They were athletic. They played dominating football. And I think next year they have a lot of players returning, almost this entire team. They'll be a dark horse next year, and I was very, very impressed with Colorado. And I want to give you an unconventional one. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say Oregon in terms of biggest surprise. I know I came on here, I said they could compete for a national championship. The next week, they lost their senior safety, Brady Barisi, who was the Rose Bowl MVP. They lost Javon Holland, the number 1 rated DB by Pro Football Focus coming into the season. Thomas Graham, another DB who started 39 games and had 40 pass breakups in those 39 games. They lost Penei Sewell, which all of us know, number 1 offensive lineman in this coming draft class. All that, plus their starting running back gets hurt this year in CJ Verdell, and they lose their 5-star linebacker Justin Flo to injury in the second game of the season. All that, and you got to replace Justin Herbert, who we now see what he can do in terms of talent. You had to replace all that talent, man. They start the season 3-0, get a chance to play for the Pac-12 title due to a COVID outbreak at Washington, and they win it. They win it on short notice over a dominant USC team. The Pac-12 Freshman of the Year was Penei Sewell's brother, true freshman Noah Sewell, who plays linebacker. 4 first and second team all Pac-12 selections, 8 honorable mentions. And I don't think Mario Cristobal gets enough credit for what's in that background on this live stream right now is them winning the Pac-12 title. The fact that they lost all this talent to the draft, to opt-outs, to COVID, to injuries, and still found a way to win, I don't know how they did it, man. And that was me, who was the biggest Oregon fan coming into the season. I don't know how they did it.
Yeah. And like I said, going back to Colorado's point, where essentially you look at, because that's another team that I thought, especially because Mel Tucker left pretty much what I would call like in the middle of the night. Right. So that's another thing where that was kind of a shock that even though the thing about it is this is how it happens. We think, Michigan State job was going to open up. Well, we kind of thought, but that's the here nor there. But once that opened up, and then Mel Tucker kind of sneaks out in the middle of the night, essentially, especially
out of nowhere. And I don't know if a lot of people know this. I mean, Colorado was on the upswing. Like even though they were 5-7, people said, okay, if Mel Tucker gets another 1 or 2 recruiting classes, this team could be balling. And then it was just like he left for. I know Michigan State sounds great, guys. Michigan State hasn't been anything recently. Since that playoff loss to Alabama, that program is not a great program. So I'm not even going to sit here and say that he left for a better job, because I think you have a better chance of competing at Colorado than you do Michigan State having to play Ohio State, Michigan. And look at what Indiana is. Iowa's up there. Wisconsin, Minnesota was a potential playoff team last year. I don't think anybody really and truly can look me in the face and say Michigan State was a better job than Colorado.
Yeah, and that was kind of a shocker, like to me. And that whole dynamic. So, who was the breakout player in the Pac-12 this year?
This one comes with a heavy heart. I got 1 offense and 1 defense, and I promised myself, even on our podcast, I would not have a Pac-12 recap without mentioning this kid's name, and that's Ty Jordan from Utah. who sadly passed away just a few weeks after the season, man. And I just want to say, starting off, man, my thoughts and prayers still go out to his family, the team, everything. And I don't think you could talk about the Pac-12 this season without addressing this kid. He was the freshman offensive player of the year. He was one of the, in my opinion, one of the best freshmen in the country. And if you didn't appreciate this kid, before that tragic passing, you need to go back and watch highlights and really appreciate what he brought to the field, because in only 5 games, man, he rushed for 600 yards, 6 touchdowns, and had over 700 all-purpose yards. He was second in the Pac-12 in rush yards per attempt with 7.2 per carry. That is elite for a true freshman. And he was top 5 in the Pac-12 in rushing yards, touchdowns, yards from scrimmage, total touchdowns from scrimmage. He was second in the country, man, across all conferences in freshman all-purpose yards per game with over 140. The kid balled out every time he went on the field, and he was one of the most dynamic athletes in the Pac-12 and was primed to take the world by storm. And it's just such a sad thing to talk about, man. But you gotta cover this kid when you talk about the Pac-12 this year. And in terms of defense, man, I think you got to go with Talanoa Hufanga from USC. He won the Pac-12, the Pat Tillman Defensive Player of the Year award in the Pac-12, and they don't give that award to just anybody. I mean, he was the first player to win it since Adoree Jackson. Everybody knows Adoree Jackson. He's been gone a long time, so it's been a minute since this happened. He led the Pac-12 in solo tackles, led it in interception and return yards. He was 3rd in total tackles, 3rd in forced fumbles, 8th in sacks as a safety. Against UCLA, he had 17 tackles in that game. That was 2 straight years where he had 17 or more tackles in the biggest game of the year. That shows you this kid can ball. He's officially declared for the draft, and so I think he's going to be a high safety on any team's draft board. But those 2 players really, really broke out for me this season.
Yeah, big time. So we talk about breakouts. Your biggest disappointments.
And I think you could you could almost put the Pac-12 itself as the biggest disappointment, man. I mean, really and truly with how they handled everything. But in terms of teams, I'm going to go with Arizona State. I know I came on here and we talked Jaden Daniels, we talked Herm Edwards, we talked about this whole program that they have. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. The Hugh Jackson is on that staff now as a defensive coordinator. They got NFL dudes in that building that kids are going to want to play for, and that's why they're recruiting at a higher level. They only played 4 games due to COVID, but they started 0-2, where they blew second half leads in the final minute. They lost a 1-point game to USC, which they should have won, and a 7-point game against UCLA. In only 2 all Pac-12 selections is disappointing to me because one was a punter. So I don't even know if that really counts for anything in terms of we have a good team. And Jaden Daniels was a preseason All-American, was not a postseason All-American. He didn't take that next step forward. Passer efficiency, which is important, was the only stat he ranked in the top 6 in the Pac-12. That's not what I want from my starting quarterback if I expect to win Pac-12 championships. I need to see Daniels take that next step. Their starting wide receiver, Frank Darby, injuries, inconsistency really hurt him. They just didn't have the depth at wide receiver to put up points against anybody important. And I want to think that Herm Edwards should have this team better in close game situations in a shortened season. I would think Herm Edwards and this staff had the best opportunity to get a Pac-12 title because they have the most experience on that coaching staff, and they just failed to deliver, man. I think they fell way, way short on expectations on this season.
Yeah, like you said, that was really interesting. That, and then then the crazy win against Arizona that essentially put Sumlin out the door.
Well, he should have been gone a long time ago. I mean, that dude, the fact that he got a job after you had Johnny Manziel, man, and you're going to the Chick-fil-A Bowl.
Right.
Come on, man. And I have so much respect for Herm Edwards as a coach and as a person, and I want him to succeed. And if anyone's going to win something at Arizona State, when you have Hugh Jackson, Herm Edwards, you have former NFL coaches as position coaches, the Pac-12 is wide open, man. Outside of USC, and Oregon, that third place is you can compete there. And I do want to say they're recruiting very well this recruiting cycle. They have a top 50 class again, so they could be on that swing. But unless you know this, man, if you don't have a quarterback, you're not winning anything in college football.
Right.
You can just wrap it up. You can pack it up and head home, because if you don't have a quarterback, you're done. I mean, look at the playoff teams. Like, look at the quarterbacks that we had there. Ian Book, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. All those guys are going to be playing on Sunday.
Yeah.
In some capacity. I mean, Ian Book and Mac Jones might be backups, but they're going to be drafted somewhere. And Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields arguably probably going top 5. And you got to have a quarterback. And speaking of quarterbacks, disappointment, man, this is going to sound crazy. I know they made it. I know they were undefeated almost the whole season. USC, to me, is a disappointment this year. I mean, if I told you a team, just blank team, just off the top of your head, they have a top 3 coach in the conference, the number 1 quarterback in the conference, the best wide receiving core, multiple defensive All-Americans, but they still didn't win the championship, and they lost to a team that lost like 8 starters to opt out. And you're like, how did that happen? And they faced that team shorthanded and on a less than a week's notice, and they lost. You would say, okay, who was the head coach and what happened to that team? And that's how I feel about USC. They had a great regular season. They beat Arizona State by 1 point. They had a 14-point fourth quarter comeback against Arizona. But for me, this was Pac-12 championship or bust for USC. You had Oregon lose their whole team to opt-outs. Arizona State was down. UCLA, say what you want about Chip Kelly, they aren't there yet. Colorado had injuries down the stretch. There was nobody there for you to have to really face. Washington had a first-year head coach. There was no reason for USC not to win the Pac-12 this year, man. And for me, I think they have to be at least a small disappointment to everybody.
Yeah. Like you said, USC, they're right. When you talk about, because really, and those opt-outs, like you said, those are like guys who will be playing on Sundays. So,
Exactly.
You lose that type of production and then also still get that win. That is, like you said, perfect opportunity for USC to strike that situation big time.
Especially with Oregon. Also, their head coach was a candidate for like 4 jobs at that time, and they thought he was leaving for Auburn going into that game. I mean, all the Auburn insider boards, they were like, go watch your new head coach in the Pac-12 championship. And there was a rumor that's still out there that he had an agreement to come to Auburn, but when he got the Pac-12 championship bid, he rescinded it and wanted to stay at Oregon because of that. So that program was going through so much, man, and you couldn't pull it. I mean, Keaton Slovis played the worst game of his career that night, and shorthanded on a short notice, Oregon looked like the more physical. They looked like the better team. They looked faster. They looked stronger, everything. And I just don't know how you do that when on paper you have all the best athletes on the field and you still choke it away year after year.
Yeah. And it is something. But so what brings to the final question of the recap. So what are you looking for in 2021 in the power and the Pac-12?
Man, I'm so excited for next year in the Pac-12. I mean, you have so many storylines to look to and just some of the teams and players and storylines to watch. I mean, you got UCLA is returning Dorian Thompson-Robinson again at quarterback. Can Chip Kelly finally get something going over there? They're returning Felton at running back. They have so many players returning, and that's one of the most fun teams to watch on TV with that offense that Chip Kelly has. He's finally got some speed in there. Can he take that next step and compete for the Pac-12? Like I just said, you got Arizona State. They're returning everybody. I mean, everyone was a sophomore on that team. They all should be coming back. They got a top 50 recruiting class coming in. What can Herm Edwards do if we get a real offseason this year? Can he finally turn Jaden Daniels into that franchise-type quarterback that he needs? And then, of course, you got USC and Oregon, man. That's going to come down to them again, most likely. Can Keaton Slovis win the Heisman? He should have one of the best odds in the country to win the Heisman. And that USC team, there's no more excuses for Clay Helton. He was on the hot seat. He got to the Pac-12 championship and lowered that heat. He got smacked in the Pac-12 championship. So that heat's turned up a little bit. If he can't win it next year, I think if you're USC, you might have to look elsewhere. In terms of Mario Cristobal in Oregon, I just listed all the opt-outs. All those young guys got a year under their belt now. They're going to be more experienced. Tyler Shaw, another year at quarterback. Man, I couldn't imagine, because right when he was starting to play as Oregon's quarterback, as they pushed back the season, Justin Herbert's out there throwing 35 touchdowns in the NFL, and he's like, I got to live up to that. Like that's real tough. So I think the pressure got to him this year. I think he'll be better next year. All those true freshmen they had starting on the back end will be better. And I think a dark horse, man, Washington. They should have been in the Pac-12 championship this year. They have a new coach after Chris Peterson retired. Can they take that next step? Can they get back and have a rightful shot at winning the Pac-12 championship? I think you got teams that can really compete. Do I think they have a playoff team in there? It's going to come down to whether Oregon and USC, where they are in the preseason poll. But as of right now, man, I think that top's too tough. So I think the Pac-12, they're playing for a Rose Bowl bid right now. And I think that's about the ceiling it is. If USC goes undefeated, they could get a shot. But, man, we'll get to the what to look for in the other conferences. I just think there are some teams that look like they could be legendary right now.
Yeah. So this puts a bow on the Pac-12 recap. So we're doing a 5-part series. So we're gonna run it back on Monday. So we'll talk about the Big 12 on Monday. That'll be at 7:00 Central Time, 8:00 Eastern Standard Time. So stick around for that as well. So before we conclude, Zach, where can they find you on social media?
Man, I'm a co-host for the Blue Bloods CFB podcast. You can find us on Twitter at @the_Blue Bloods. I mean, that's on Instagram. On Twitter, it's at @the__ Blue Bloods. Facebook at the Blue Bloods Pod. Look up the Blue Bloods on YouTube. You can find us there. Podcast available everywhere. You can find me at Zach McKinnell. My co-host B-Dub. You can find him at B-Dub from the Hub on Twitter. Go follow us. Go follow the Blue Bloods. Make sure to listen to us and Couch Coach Live. And yeah, you can find us all there, man. And I am looking forward to the rest of these conferences.
Yeah. So, like we said, the Pac-12, we did the Pac-12 today. Monday, the Big 12. So we'll talk about those teams. That's going to be another interesting recap as well. So for Zach and his coach, catch you guys on Monday.